Welcome to the Router Workshop. Today we'd like to talk about routers, but we'd like to talk about some very special things about them. It never ceases to amaze me how many people have routers and never really use them. I've seen them come to workshops in July with them in their Christmas wrapping yet. Nobody takes them out and uses them. And one of the first things, people, we need to do with our router to get its most value out of it is mount it in some type of a table. We have designed a table that we feel meets all of those features, and not only that so much as about safety. And we're going to talk a little bit about safety in this film too, because we'd like to look at that. It's always nice to keep all those fingers. First off, I want to set this router down and we're going to come to a table situation. I think we should have a table, and we've designed a table that we think is very unique. It consists of many parts in it, but we have some very unique things about it that it locks together, and we call it a half-fold table. It has a little insert into the bottom piece in here, and we have a pin, and it interlocks. It's a nylon locking pin, and it holds really well, so we can set it together. And I'd like to just put this table together as we start here and tell you what we're doing. We're going to lock these two line up onto the inserts. Just a nice little bang like that. We'll put it together. We have a side piece, doesn't have any grooves in it. We've got the pin at the top. We also have a pin at the bottom. In here we have a little dado, and the dado allows this piece of plywood to slide down in it. And we'll slide that down in it. Another insert at this side, put it into place. Now this piece, the center piece and the left-hand side here is plain, but this one's on a groove in here. This little dado in here will receive our drawer where we keep our bit storage. So we'll slide that into spot in here, bang it down. Put the center piece, also has our dados in it. Slide it down, lock it into place. Now the top. The top's an important thing because one of the things we don't want it to do is to warp. We've used a warp-free plywood in here. It's a stress plywood, that is that there's no knots involved inside of the core of it. We have a plastic laminate top with an oak outside trim. But one of the main features of it is the hole that we're going to mount our mounting plate in. And this mounting plate hole is a rabbeted groove in here that sits flush all the way around inside and allows the plate to go. But first, on the back side of it, we'll again have the little inserts that fit over the pins, and we'll lock the table together. So we'll line them up, pop them down, line the front ones up. Now, we've got a real sturdy table here. Regardless what you have at your workshop to fasten it to, we simply got a table here to fasten it to. Maybe it's on your workbench or wherever. What really makes it well organized in your workshop is that you can take it with you, fold it up in a car, take it to the cottage. You can set it in any portion of your workshop, set it on any kind of a workbench. You need no special tools for it. Now, one of the biggest things that have is here, you've got to have a place to store cutters. People always say, well, gee, routing costs a lot of money. The router's the cheap thing, people. It's the cutters that get into it. We've got a little selection of cutters in here, and one of the most important things you'll do with your cutters is keep them in an organized section like this. You'll notice that we have holes drilled in here to mount these cutters in. And the reason for that is that it'll keep them from banging against one another. These are all carbide bit cutters in here, and what we want to do is keep them separated. We've drilled holes. We've got some little buckets on the back thing for little miscellaneous tools. On the bottom side is a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, and that goes in that 1/4-inch dado that we had on the sides and becomes a drawer. So we got our bit storage. You can always go to that when you need it. Next thing we need to do is put our little other accessories inside of our cabinet. We've got a little box in here that contains some of the little tools. We have our wrenches down in here, little screwdriver, hammer, a couple of clamps here that we can put in, another little wrench, and you got a storage for it. But the main thing is, we want to do now is choose a router. And when we choose the router, we have some method of mounting it. And we've come up with a very unique system that we like. This is a phenolic base plate. This base plate will not warp. It stands very straight in it. Its tolerances are good, and it fits down in this rabbet, but it has some features about it. Because every router is different, we have a different screw pattern on its base. And in this particular plate, it'll handle all 4-hole base plates. It'll handle all 3. As well, it has a large hole in here that'll accommodate guides. It also has a small hole that accommodates a safety pin. And we'll show you that safety pin in just a little bit here as to what it's used for. It's a very important safety thing. Now, the plate fits around down into that groove and lays really nice and flat in there. We get a few questions lots of times about a plate like that. Where should it be? Should it be flush with it? Should it be a little lower? Should it be higher? The main thing, people, is that once you pass the bit, the cutting is done. You don't want to butt into the side of your table. So if the plate is milled in it, and when we manufacture them, we have them just slightly above, so when you come in there, you don't butt into anything. The main thing is that it's smooth across the top of the plate to the work surface. Once it's past the bit, it's cut anyway. Now, let's choose a router. There's so many routers on the market, and it's just a case of whatever. I think I've got one of everything, so I can really tell which one I like the best, but there's depending on the job that you're doing. Today we're going to use a router in here that's a plunge type router, and I've said a few times in my workshops that I probably wouldn't buy many routers that weren't plunges. And the reason for it is that if it isn't a specific job, I think the plunge router is the best because of its accuracy, its ease to setting up. Now, every router has a base plate on it. And this base plate on here is removable by whatever screw pattern it is. This particular one has 4 movable screws in it. So what we're going to do is stand this up in here. We're going to take these screws out and replace it with the big plate. So we'll just run these screws back out. And incidentally, you people are having trouble getting some of these screws. You might try a spot that carries metric ones. Most of the European and the Japanese routers carry, or Japanese particularly, have all the metric system in it. On this side of the border, sometimes people ream them out and change them. There's the plastic plate that comes off. We're going to replace that now with our phenolic base plate. Again, remember, we said in here we had these portions in it and they slide. So just line them up. One of the big things is, of course, is that little hole that we call the safety pin. That safety pin hole should be towards the operator, so it should face you when you mount it on your router. Also keep in mind where you're going to put it, that you're going to have the handle is faced out here. We have the locking mechanism and we have the switch in it. And that switch is important to have it to the outside that you can get. So face it to you when you're mounting it. Just set it up like that. Take the plate, it'll line up over the holes, and start the screws. Now when you start these screws in here, don't put them in tight. Just put them in loose in here till you get all 4 of them lined up. And run them in here. Sometimes we run into these that some of them don't quite line up in it. It'd be a poor drilling, but not often. Now, when we get them in here, just tighten them down much like you change the tire on your car. Tighten a little on each one all the way around. Once you get them all tightened in here, you can go around and re-snug them. And what it does has a tendency to pull that plate center on around where the bit comes through. And that's important when we want to do some guide work. So we'll snap these into place. Now, have a look at that. We've got it all set up here. We've got the plate on it. The center piece comes through. Even the chuck comes up close to the flush, so you don't lose any thickness with the thickness of the plate as to the depth of the bit that you might get. The unique thing about this, people, is the fantastic thing that we like about it is that most router tables, you're under here trying to change cutters you can't see. Where here, we set it up here, you can see what you're doing and line it up. It's so neat because we're up here where we can see now. Down in here, you're not sure if the wrench slips, you could bust one of your router bits. So one of the things we'll start off here with is let's just take and mount a cutter in it. We've chosen a cutter here, and the cutter that I have is a Roman OG bit. This Roman OG bit has a pilot on it, and that pilot is a ball bearing, has a little set screw in it, and a little word of caution here when you buy a brand new router bit. People, remember it has a little bolt in the end in here. Please take off the plastic cover, put the wrench in it, tighten it down. The reason for that is that sometimes they don't get tight at the factory, and if you're doing a nice edge along your cabinet here and all of a sudden that bearing came off, then it'll ruin your project. So what you want to make sure is that that bearing is tight when you start. When you rotate it, every time you pick that bit up, put it in your hand and rotate that a little. Check that bit. If that bearing becomes a little rough in it, so you feel it's not turning as smooth as it should, replace it. Don't try to oil it or grease it or anything like that, because all you do is just for a period of time it'll come loose. One of the things we've seen in a workshop, and it happened in my own, that I had one explode. And when it happens is that that bit is turning at the same speed that the bearing will. Once you pop a piece of material against it, the bearing stops. And when it does that, it gets hot. And when it won't turn, it can explode. And when those pieces go, you don't know where they go. So make sure you repair them when they need it and replace the bearing. The shank again. Rub your fingers over the shank each time before you put it on and see that there isn't any burrs in it. Now this router in here, the chuck on them, and I say again, when you buy a router, check to see what it'll do. I think it's important that when you buy cutters, that you buy something that will handle a large shank. This particular one, you can see the one on the left is a 1/4 inch shank. We have a 1/2 inch shank. The larger the shank, people, the better off you'll be. And the reason for that is that we're running cutters in here. They have a tendency to generate a lot of heat, and with that, all that metal in there, it'll dissipate it and run cooler. When they run cooler, they'll stay sharper longer. Secondly, and most importantly about it is, we don't have the vibration with the large shank that we do with a small one. Can you imagine a cutter that large running with a shank that size? They're on the market, and I would recommend people that you not purchase them. That's too much cutter out there to run with that size of a shank. Well, anyway, let's put that big one away for now, and let's chuck this up. There's little shim pieces that come, and these little sleeves are split, and there's a split right through the middle. That split down the middle is meant so that when the chuck squeezes down, it closes on it and grips on the shank of that bit. There's also the same thing in the collet system. Now, this collet system comes out, and I'd like to take a quick look at this. It also has a split right down the middle. And sometimes we've had people come and say, Bob, you know, these bits come loose on me. What can I do about it? Well, the main thing to do about it is to take the split in the sleeve and line the split up with the collet. That gives it a little better purchase when you're tightening it down. If it's on the opposite side, it takes too much pressure. Sometimes the bit can come loose. And believe me, people, when a bit comes loose, it doesn't go down. It just simply comes out through the top. So let's just mount that in here. This particular router has a 2-wrench system. And this 2-wrench system has 2 wrenches, again, of their different size. And we'll just start this collet in here. And once in a while, you'll find that you get a little burr on the bottom of the collet, so you might want to check that each time and keep them clean. Now, when I say keep them clean in it, what I do for cleaning, I take the collets once in a while, lay them on a newspaper, and I spray them with an oven cleaner, Easy Off or something like that. It really cleans them up good, and then you don't have that little buildup of residue from the woods. We got 2 wrenches. One goes on the bottom of the chuck, one on the top, and you can pull on them. I get asked many times, how tight do you put them? I pull them as tight as I can for the wrenches, but don't get 24-inch wrenches and pull on them and tighten them up. You'll never get them apart. So make sure you use the wrenches that come with it and pull it as tight. Now, taking them apart, and I want to talk about that now, even if I'm not going to take it here, because so many times we've got a column on here, and that column slides up and down inside of that router. And all it takes is a nick on there, and it won't slide anymore. When you're taking them apart, set your wrench up, one on there, one on the other, set them together and squeeze the wrenches together as opposed to pulling and letting it slip. If the wrench slips, get a nick in there, it will not work anymore. So just pull them together. You can take them apart real easy. There's no effort to it, no pull on it. Now, isn't that neat? We got that tight in here. We'll put the cord into place. And by the way, as a safety precaution, don't forget, keep the cord unplugged at all times when you're fitting or anything you're doing with your fingers inside. I don't know how many times we've had a switch turned on accidentally or a router started by itself. So as a safety thing, please remember to do that. Now, when we tip this down in here, we're going to mop this into place in it, put this around. If it's nice and smooth, we've got the power in our hand, we can raise the cutter up. Keep in mind throughout these series of videos that we'll have no guards over the bits, and that's to facilitate you being able to see what goes on. I think in your workshop you should have a guard over here and a system of picking up with a vacuum to take off the debris that you're cutting. Now that bit, if you notice, sticks above here and runs. We've got the power in here. We're going to plug this in now, and now we're going to go back to this little hole in behind the bit in here that we call the safety pin. Let me really take a good look at that safety pin. That safety pin, people, in here is round on the side and the bottom, but it has a small shoulder on it. That pin fits down just in front of that bit, and it's important that you use that. The pin fits in the hole and sits like that. Now, the rotation of that bit is rotating in that direction. And when it's rotating in that direction, what it has a tendency to do is want to take your workpiece away. Now, the only time that I would recommend that you use a pilot-mounted bit like that to follow is when you have an irregular surface like I have here. There is no way you can follow this with a straight, so we have to use the pilot to follow it. And when we do that, and we approach this piece of bit up to the piece of material in here, what happens is it wants to take it away. I'll just pull the pin out. We've got the power unplugged here, and we'll have a look. When that bit comes in here, what it does is take a hold of it and pull that piece away from you. And when it does that, then your hand's over the edge and you'll take it by, and you're fighting it all the time. This way, when we've got the pin in place and we can pull it up like this, then it can't get away. And the neat part about it is you're always there, whether you use it right up tight or a small distance away, as far as it can go is there. And don't forget that to use that system. Let's plug it in here a little bit and take a run at this. Direction of feed. You hear so much about direction of feed, and in the book we talked about direction of feed, and it's important. What you always want to do is the end grains first. Down the side grains, cross the end and up the side again. That way you prevent chipping. And above all, people, never run with the rotation of the bit. That is, the bit's running in this direction. Don't try to run with it. It'll only take the piece away from you. So let's turn it on here and see what we got. Notice the nice edge we have along the outside edge. People, that's one of the #1 things that people do with their router. They put a nice fancy edge around the outside of a board, write their name on it, hang it on the cottage. There's more to routing than that, and we're going to have a lot of fun here showing you some good things to do with it. But we've got this nice edge done around here. We used our safety pin. Now what we can do is take the pin out and we can do the inside edges. We want to do the inside of these little picture frames, and we'll drop it over the top like that. And remember now, you always go around and feed into the cutter, so we'll start in. But don't put your fingers on the inside. Keep them on the outside. Now we'll start up and do that. It sure doesn't take very long to make a fancy little picture frame up, and like we always say, from $8.95 to $10.95, and that's a pretty easy way to use your scrap material up. The thing we don't have on the frame is, I'll turn it around the back side, we don't have a groove in here to put the picture in. So what we'll do is just stop for a second now. I'm going to change cutters, and we're going to put a rabbiting bit in, and we'll run a little rabbit in the back. So we'll just lay this down, and just notice how easy it is to change cutters. You flip that back, you put your plug-in in a spot where you know where it is, and you can unplug it. Now we'll change cutters. We'll pop this cutter in here, and we'll change it, and this time we're going to put a rabbiting bit in. This rabbiting bit has got 2 cutters, one on either side with a bearing in it again, and what it will do is cut a 3/8 groove on the side, a little rabbit in there to allow that picture. The depth of it, when we set depth up on it, will be whatever you want to put in, whether it's glass or just a picture. And just keep the groove clean in here so it mounts in. Isn't that neat? It flips right back in there. No hassle with it. And above all, if I forget to tell you again, don't bolt it down. Once you bolt that plate into place, what you're doing is causing a lot of vibration, and you don't need that. When it sits there with the wood will absorb it, it sits there neat, it doesn't bounce around, and it's safe to operate. Now, we got a depth set on it, and now we're going on the inside edge in here, and we're going to cut this groove out. And when I do that, don't get it too thin on the inside edge in here. Allow yourself some room if your wood's not thick enough or you're deep in here, depending on what you're setting. If you're using glass, you probably need a little more than just a picture. Let's just drop that into place here. We'll take our power again, plug the power in. Don't forget each time. Notice the groove in the back. That will allow you now to put your picture into place. It's kind of neat, you know, when you can do that and set it up and come up with a product in a very few minutes with it. Remember again in there that we've taken the guard off here so that you can see, but the other safety things, don't work with sleeves on to get caught in there, and make sure you got some safety glasses on, and a lot of people like to use a little earplugs in it, and that's a safe thing to do too. The next item we'd like to do here on this table mount system is build a little box. We're kind of pleased with the little system that we have here, and first I'd like to show you a completed one in here. And when we build boxes, people, what's really unique about it is that you make the box, but you got to get a lid to fit it. You got to get into the box. So we have this lid and a bottom, and it's very difficult to build tops and bottoms of boxes and make them fit. So the idea is to build the whole box and then cut the lid off afterwards. So I would like to show you a very unique system we have here. We'll just lift the lid off of this box and show you. Inside here is a groove, and it's a little shiplap groove is what it really is in here. It's a rabbit. We got a rabbit inside and one outside. Now those two fit together then and keep that lid from sliding off. And then inside, if you wish, you can figure out your sizes here. You can put boxes inside of boxes and keep going down into small ones and larger ones. So what we'd like to do here is look at building that box, and I would really like to show you on our table mount how you make that groove and cut that box apart and make it work, because it's a very simple operation. So let's just set the finished box aside here. And it takes, people, 6 pieces to make a box. First off in here, we need the 2 sides. We need the 2 ends, and we need a top and a bottom. And I'm just going to get my pencil here and just point out to you what we'd like to do. What we'd like to do in here with this is put this box together in such a manner that we had a rabbet cut all the way around the top and the bottom. The 2 ends we'll leave for now. The side pieces we're going to cut a rabbet just on the ends of each. Now these are all milled the same thickness, so they're 3/8 thick. And the easiest way to get a rabbet in there successfully is to rabbet just half that thickness. Always go half. Then it's easier to pick up your thickness of your material for your lengths. If you have 1 thickness off, you only take 1 thickness for length, and it's easy to calculate your pieces. So let's just set these pieces aside here for a moment, because what we need to do is install a rabbeting bit. We'll tip the router up like that. Isn't that neat how we get that out of there? Don't have to work underneath it. We've got the rabbeting bit again, 2 cutters in here, pilot. We'll put the sleeve on it. We'll line the splits up in it. Set the router bit in. One little cautionary thing, if you would like to keep in mind, when we're installing router bits in there, don't install them so they're right to the bottom in it. Put them down and then isolate it. Pull it up a little. If you isolate that from the shaft of it, your router bits will not transfer that heat down into your machine. Now we'll tighten it down. We'll tip the rabbet back in here. Bit in and router, and tip this back up, and we run it up for depth. Now, one of the things we've got here, we've got a pilot on this bit. And we're not going to cut these freehand on here. What we'll use this time, because we all have straight edges in here, is a fence system. And we don't have anything fancy. We've got a polyethylene. This white material, people, is polyethylene. We use it because it's very stable. It doesn't warp. We find in it that we've got 3 little things that we need in a fence. We need a half hole in here to accommodate that pilot. We need a half hole underneath here to accommodate the cuttings and the chips so they can get away. And the last thing you'd like to do on your fence is to take and chamfer off all 4 edges. And the reason for chamfering up all the 4 edges is that you get buildup of chips and things, and they'll filter out through the side and allow your workpiece to come up tight. Now, like I said, I have no fancy method of fastening this. I just simply use 2 C-clamps, and we'll tighten them in place. And we'd like to isolate that bearing. And when I say isolate the bearing, that is that the bearing's not touching the workpiece. So we'll leave this little straight edge, and we'll tighten the last clamp. And keep in mind, in a table mount system, that this doesn't have to be square with anything. Lots of times we talk about squaring it, but when we're around a bit like that, this fence can sit at any angle, and we'll see a little later how that setup is. Once we get this set in here, one of the nice things about it, we're going to have to set up is depth. And people, we measure too many things. I think that people, we measure so many things, and that's where we make mistakes. And I think that we need to do here now is set depth, and I'd like to show you an easy method of setting halfway. You can guess at that if you like. You can put a pencil mark on it. Lay your workpiece down beside the cutter, your little sample workpiece, and raise that cutter up to what you think is halfway. And we'll run that up halfway on it, tighten it in, and then this is how we'll check it. Just rotate that bit, see that it's clear. Plug it in, make sure we get power here, and we'll turn the switch on. Now I just guessed at that, and I went halfway through. I've cut a groove in here. Now I'm going to turn it over, and we'll cut one from the opposite side, and that way you can tell whether you're exactly half or not. Now, if you look at that, there's 2 things can happen. Well, actually, 3 things. You can be right the first time. If you're too deep, you'll end up with a little groove between those 2. If you're too shallow, you end up with a little fuzzy piece between the 2, and you have to adjust your bit to suit. That's the quickest way. If you're reading all them funny little marks on a measuring stick, you'll never get it right. Use the sample piece of the same thickness of material. And today, I'm lucky it fits right off the bat here. So now we're ready to go. Now, we're not going to do anything to these end pieces, and we'll set them aside. But what we are going to do is cut that rabbet down the ends of each end side in here. Now what happens when we run these by, when the bit comes out on the back side, we may get a little tear out. And when we get a little tear out, we need a little push stick. And we've got a really unique little push stick system here. Have a real close look at this. It's only a scrap piece of wood. It has a 1/2-inch hole in it, and we use a shaker peg. This shaker peg is shaped so that you can hang on to it good with the handle. It has a tapered dowel pin, and it simply goes in the hole like that. Now we've got a pin in it to hold with. We can run that behind, and it gives a little backing. If you'd like to have a look there, the backing comes in, and the cutter then will prevent that chipping in it. When you get too many notches in your little block, you throw it away and make a new one. Let's start up and run that. See the rabbit all the way around on these pieces in here? These are our top and our bottom pieces. And then our side piece has only just the ends done on them, on the end grain. And then we used a little block. You'll notice in the bottom here where we used it as a backer, it's got a little chip out of it. And that prevented it from tearing out on the side piece. If you notice, we talked about the 1/2 hole under the fence. It ran all out the end here, and now you can see where it came from, that it had room to go. If you don't have that in there, it keeps all those chips, and that's where you get the hammering from. Well, we got the little box here. We'll just clean it aside, and let's just try this piece. We're going to try this. We'll put a side piece in here, and we'll put an end piece in, and we'll put a side piece. Now, we'll drop the lid on it. Hey, we got a neat little box in there. Now, the big thing in it, we can glue that together and cut it apart, but we're going to put that groove on the inside edge here so that we get that lip that we talked about earlier. So what I'm going to do now is just set this aside here and my little push stick, and we'll change cutters. And the cutter we'll put in is a 3/8 straight bit in it. When I mention straight bit, people, that means that it's a straight cutter. It'll cut a straight dado, but the bit itself is going to be a little unique. The bit itself we have here is a 3/8 cutter. I'm going to choose a 3/8 cutter out of this, and it's a 3/8 bit, all right, and it's straight, but it's a spiral, and it's a solid carbide one. The reason for the spiral is that it meets the wood at an angle that allows the chips to cut. It cuts cleaner, and it cuts faster, and it probably stays sharper than any other cutter you'll ever have used. Now we'll tighten that into place. Let me turn this around so you can have a good look at it. When I close this down in here, you'll note that I have a tremendous amount of space around that bit in it. And what we want to do is close that up. And we have a little brass fitting in here, and I'm going to let you have a good close look at it. It's got a hole in the top of it, and it sits flush here with the table, and the hole's about 3/4 of an inch. We have threads on the back side, and it has a little flange on it. It simply fits down in the hole like that. We have a brass ring nut that goes on the outside edge. People always ask us, why are you using brass? Sure, it's expensive, but is it ever good? One nice thing about brass, it has a holding quality to it that when you tighten it with your fingers, you don't need a wrench to hold it. It'll stay there. So we'll just tighten that into place, and then we'll have another quick glance at it here. See the difference now? It reduced the size of the hole around the cutter, and it's a safer operation for you. Okay, we'll blow that off. We'll put that down into place in here. We'll run the cutter up. We'll go back to the fence. This time, if you notice the 1/2 hole in it, I'm going to flip that 1/2 hole over. And we'll put it in here. That way we're not running by an open space. And the height of the lid of the box will determine the distance the bit is away from the fence. And we'll just arbitrarily pick a slot in here. Now we'll go back to the box. When we go back to the box in here, we need to set a depth. Don't measure anything. You don't even want to know. What we need to know in here is just so it's exactly the same as that. So just slide that up over, lower the cutter, raise it up to the height of that rabbit, and lock it. You don't want to know how thick it is. You just want it to be right. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to do anything with the top and the bottom. The only things we're going to do is run a dado down inside of each piece of these. So let's just give that a whirl. We need some power here. We'll plug the power in, we'll turn it on. Now let's have another look at that. There's our groove in here. There's our little dado down in here. And now one of the very important things we do. On the outside of these two pieces, we want to do is make sure that you mark where that dado is on the outside of the box. And usually I'll do it on two ends because sometimes I forget, you see. And we'll put these two marks. That's very important. Now let's assemble the box. We'll put that together. And we'll slip that one together. We'll slip the next one here. And take note now, when I put these two pieces all in here, that all of those grooves are all lined up. They all have to be. Don't tip one over. Make sure we get them all lined up in here. So we'll slip those all together in here. And now, if I can get that set up there, they don't want to stay together very good today. Having a terrible time, aren't I? Now we'll put the top on it. Box is ready to glue together. We've got the box all glued. We got it marked in here, and we can glue the box. I'm going to just set that aside because I got some instant glue here. Notice we got the box all glued. If I can get a good close here, look at it, you'll notice on the outside of the box that I have it marked here. When we originally marked it and we sanded it. And when we sand that box off, you sometimes sand your marks, so transfer them over. What we're going to do now is cut a groove just below that one. That's where the groove is now in the box, and that'll allow it to come together. So let's just check height. If you sanded the box, you may have to check the height on it. We're going to move that fence out, and we'll set that up so that we cut the groove just below. And notice how I'm moving the fence. I only have to move one end of it because it doesn't matter. Don't try that on your table saw. That only works on your router table. End grain are all out on this end of this box. There's the side grain. So what we want to do is do this side, turn the box around, and do the other side. So let's just flip that in here. We can have a good look in there. You'll notice a little line inside. We've cut through, and you can see where the groove is on the inside of the box in it. So let's see if we can continue on through there. Now, what we need to do is find our masking tape. We've got a groove. We got a groove on this end. What we're going to do now is put a little 3/8 chip in here and a little bit of masking tape to hold that lid together while we cut the last one off here. And I'm going to take a pencil to just mark this so you can see that they all line up, and we'll check this box after. Now what we're going to do is cut this piece. We're going to roll it around and cut the next one. What we've got in here is this groove all the way around the box, and it should slip down because the groove is in the top. So let's just take this off, open up the box, have a look in there. You can see the groove on the inside of the box now. We'll just save these little wedges for next time, and we also have groove on the outside. Now what we can do with this box is we'll just roll it around. I put a line on it. We'll line the lines up and see. And the top fits on, and there's the little box, see? Now let's just try it. We can rotate it around, try it. If the box is perfectly square, it'll fit on all four sides, see? And you've got a little box. You can decorate it, do whatever you like. It's a simple method of doing a nice top to it, and it fits well. The next thing we'd like to do here is try to do some of these nice fancy dovetails on us. Well, most of the time you see a jigs and fixtures on the market that you use special guides for, and we'll have a look at those too. But this particular one is, if you don't have that and you'd like to just use your table mount, let's make some dovetails. We'll make a little item. I'll set this box aside here, and we'll pick up on this. What we're going to do here, first off, is we're going to run some dovetails. And we're going to run a dovetail groove, the full length of this piece of material in here. And the other two pieces that we have here, we'll run a dovetail groove, the length of those two also. And then on these, we'll put the pins to fit it. It's usually easy to put the groove in because that's the size of the dovetail bit. But it's to get the pin. And let me show you a little way to do this. So we'll set these aside, and the first thing we'd like to do now is change and put a cutter in here. And we're going to put a dovetail bit in. And let's have a look at that dovetail bit. That dovetail bit has got a few little features in it that we look at. Number one, We can buy dovetail bits from pretty near any kind of size you wish, and today we're using a 1/2-inch dovetail bit. And this 1/2-inch dovetail bit measures exactly 1/2 inch from this side to this side. So we got the 1/2 inch. The angle that this tapers on is 14 degrees. Now that's a standard dovetail bit that you normally would see. You can buy them from 8 degrees and all different kinds within that, but this is a standard 14. It's got a 1/2 inch shank on it. We're going to put it in the router. We'll mount it in again. Set it up. Notice again, we'll take a look here at our bushing. We've got that bush down so that we've got the protection around the outside edge. We'll flip the router back into place, pop it in, raise the bit up. Now, we're going to put the fence back on this time. Fasten it in here. We'll get our 2 clamps, and we'll clamp one end first, and then we'll set the distance here. The first thing we're going to do is run that dovetail groove down the center of this piece of material. But first, before we start here, we want to set a depth up. Anytime you're cutting dados or dovetails or anything like that, remember, don't set the depth of the bit greater than 1/2 the thickness of the material you're using. And in this case, we got probably about 5/8, but we don't really care there. So just hold it up there, have a good look at it, snap the height up. You can have a look. We're very close there, probably to the 1/2 side of it. Now the tricky part comes. We laugh about this. People measure the piece, you divide the distance in it. What we want to do is be dead center with it. And the easiest way to do that is just take your pencil and mark it right in the center. Now we laugh at this a little bit because all I did was just take a guess mark and I put it in the center of what I thought was center in here. And we'll mark that in center line here. Now that's not as chintzy as it looks, because when I put this against the fence, this side, you can put it over the center of the bit, that line, just like that, and put your second clamp on. You'll notice that the fence isn't parallel with anything, but again, that doesn't matter. Now, once we get this centered over here, take that stick and rotate it around the other side, using the opposite side against the fence, put it over the bit and check it. That's how you can tell. And if there's any adjustments to be made, you can use your fine adjusting tool. Your little hammer in here, just tap that over and center it in there and come back to it, and we've got center. So that's the easiest way to do that. I know we get tape measures and then we count all them funny little marks, but I prefer to do it that way. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to run this. People ask all the time, what about feed speed? You know, how fast should I push that into my router? One of the things I'm going to do when I start this machine up is that I'll come up to the bit and I'll stop. Just for that second, people. Just stop for that second, and then let that ease it in there till the bit gets a chance to start to cut. Once it does that, then we'll feed. And let's not feed any faster than what it will clean. And you kind of watch this when we go in here. Let me plug it in and get some power. Notice the nice clean cut that we've got in here. And you notice the cuttings, how they were coming out in a stream ahead of us. If you feed too fast and you come out in there, what it does, it plugs up inside of here, and when it plugs up, that's where you get that chatter from. When you get a chatter, you get a bad cut in it. It could even grab the piece and take it away on you. Remember that you never do that too fast. Let it cut. It won't burn. If the cutter's correct, it won't burn in there anyway. And I know a lot of people think that the burning comes from your feed. It does in a case, but most cases, they're probably a poor bit as opposed to what we're doing. So what we did, we put the groove in the board. Now, let me just set that aside, and we'll go back here and we'll pick up these 2 pieces. There again, what we're going to do here now is we're going to cut a groove down in the center of these 2 pieces. So just put your pencil on the center mark in here. Make a center mark. Now when we do that, you'll notice the distance of the heights and things in here, and people look at it and say, well, gee, you know, that's quite a ways to guess at. If it bothers you at all, what you can do is take a block of wood, an arbitrary size, doesn't really mean anything, put it flush on one side, put a little mark on it, slide it over to the other side, put another little mark on it. Now you've got equal distance from either side and you reduced it, so when you put your pencil in the middle, it's easier to guess at. Now, once we have that, again, loosen up your clamp, move your fence over, slide the piece into place in here, tighten the clamp down. Check it, got it on this way, turn it around, check it, adjust it, we're away. Okay, easy easy part done. Now what we've got to do is get a pin to fit into that. And in order to get that pin in, there's a couple of ways to do it, but we're going to try here. Make sure that the two pieces that you're cutting the pin, or how many pieces you have, are all the same thickness. That'll be important. We're going to take and move the fence now, and we'll move that fence in over the bit, because this time we don't want to only expose that amount of cutter on each side. And I'll explain that a little better here. We'll just clamp this down. And I'm just guessing at this, and you need a little trial piece of scrap to try it on. And we'll tighten this down. And one of the most important things again, don't change the height of the bit. It's important that you don't change the height of the bit. Now, what we're going to do is run this through, run a dovetail, half the dovetail side, and turn it. And the piece that's left has then got to fit into that piece here. Okay, let's try it. There's the half dovetail that we've got, and we've come down. And we're going to run that right through the side, and then I'll come on the other side, and then we'll see what we've got. Don't start with too great so your pin is too small. You can't add the wood back on again. There's the pin. There's there. Down in it now. Let's try it. Now, what we've got is a very, very tight fit there. I could drive that in, but what we want is a sliding fit. So what we'll do is just adjust the fence. Above all, don't loosen the clamps. Leave them snug and just tap it back. That way you'll be sure to get it. Now, when we bring this into place in here, we'll slide that in. I'll just slide it up so you can have a good look at this. We'll bring it up into there, and there's the fit. Now, we want a sliding fit, and that's what we've got. Now what we're going to do is continue. We'll do these two sides and the opposite. Now you can look, and we've got the dovetails on either side. We've got a dovetail around the pin in here. But we've got a lot of square edges. And with our table mount, we can round these, because what we're going to do, before I assemble and show you what we're making here, we'll slide this piece in, and these two pieces come together. And we want to make a nice round corner. And the only way we can get this is by coping it. And we're going to come up here with a rounding over bit now. I'm going to change to, and we'll come up to a point and stop, and then we'll start again. And we'll use that safety pin. So let me just change cutters in here and get rid of this fence. We'll change cutters, and this time we'll put a rounding over bit in. They tell us that a rounding over bit is probably the most used bit in routing. More people have a rounding over bit than any other kind, and I guess there's more of them sold because we like to round corners off of things. It's a bit that has a pilot on it. It has about a 1/4 inch radius in it, and we'll mount that in the router. And this time we're going to have to take this little bushing out. We'll take the bushing out because it won't go through that hole size now. And we'll slip that back into here, pop it in, and we'll bring the bit up. This time just take a stick, lay it across the cutter here, and raise it up. One of the things you don't want to do is create a line on it. So we'll pop it in there so it just makes a nice holding. Now back to that safety pin. Remember the pin we used here a moment ago? We'll see if we can find it here again in my pocket. The little pin goes in, and what we're going to do now is that we're going to come up here and around and stop and start all the time. If we go by here, the pilot now will run into that hole, see? And we don't want that. So we're going to start there and go down and stop. So we're just clean up all the corners on all of these things, and you have a look at what I'm doing. We need some power in here. Now just quickly, we'll slide this in here. Got a little bit of a sliver in there that came off that rounding over. We'll slide that into place, and we'll slide those up together. Let me hold them in here, and you just have a look in here how they fit together. I'll slide it back now, and we'll look at it again. When you slide it back, if we'd have run across here first, we'd have had a hollow in there. If we do it now, it would sliver. So that's why we started and we stopped there. Those two pieces get glued together. But let me just slide the whole project together here and let you have a look at it. This piece slides in this direction. This one slides down. This one slides in from this side. And this one slides down. Now, we've got a little book stand. Any pressure on that holds your books. And you slide it back and forth in here, you adjust it to wherever your books are. And now we've got another little project to make. People, there isn't anything like a table mount to do the kinds of things you want with it. A couple of little things in here that I'd like to take apart and just explain to you. See the shape that I've made that bracket? Sometimes we like to cut down on time and material and speed of doing things. And if you lay this out real careful, when you make that, you'll notice that those two blocks will lay together. And those two blocks laid together, your curve come around and it makes only one cut. So you only got one cut to get the piece out of. And better than that is when you're cutting all your pieces, you will note that they come out of the same size. So that you only got two sizes of pieces to cut that way, and it saves a lot of confusion. People, I don't think you can have anything better than a table mount to do things. Can you imagine having to clamp this to a workbench and running your router apart on it? It's better to mount the router and you'll have a better use out of it. Throughout the series here, we're going to do things on the table mount as well as on top, and you'll see that the table mount is the slickest way to do it. But don't forget, when you do it, make it so it's handy and you can tip your router out and get up here to do what you need to do as opposed to down in your box. And we thank you for watching.